you have to be ready to hear people out. Even if it's not what you want to hear, you just have to listen. And I think that's what people aren't doing right now. Everybody's talking over each other and making conclusions very early on. And you cannot be inclusive that way, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. It's impossible.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Kristi Piehl, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
The decision to take a leap of faith or start over is an intentional and scary one. And frankly, not many people are brave enough to leave the comfortable and venture into the scary waters of the unknown. Rosemary Ugboajah has flipped her script twice, once as a young woman and once as an experienced professional. Rosemary, welcome to the Flip Your Script podcast.
Well, hello. Thank you.
Well, just by talking, people are going to notice that you have a beautiful accent. And that's the first Flip Your Script that you did, is that you decided to move to America as a young woman. Tell me about the decision to do that and what brought you here.
Well, I moved to America at 21. But Kristi, I think there's a level of flipping my script that happened before I moved.
Tell me about it.
Well, so the first, I would say, I moved from Nigeria at 17 to England. And then I moved from England to America at 21. So my accent is a confusion of three continents blended together. So that's how that happened.
So take me through what brought you as a teenager from one country to another to another.
So at 17, I moved from Nigeria, but I was born in England initially. I was born in England, but my parents moved to Nigeria and I went to high school there. So I went to boarding school in Nigeria, graduated high school at 16. It's a different system there. And I did start in high school really early, graduated at 16. And the year after graduation, I was put on a plane to go back to England to go to university. So I did have family in England, but I got in, I was in my own studio apartment, and that was my first, that was the first time I had to really consider what I was going to do with my life. Boarding school, everything kind of gets dictated to you. You don't get to make a whole lot of decisions. The bell rings and you move. That's pretty much how that worked out. But being on my own at 17, and with the expectation that I was going to enroll in college to do engineering, I hit my first crossroad.
So I want to back up just a second. Boarding school isn't as common, as you know, in America as it is in other places. So I think for a lot of Americans, when we hear boarding school, we think Harry Potter. We go to this candles floating and very magical place. And what were the benefits of boarding school for you?
Oh, I won't say I acknowledged any benefits while I was going through it, but in hindsight, I would say there were benefits to it. And I was a tiny child. I was one of the youngest in the school when I joined, and it was very different. So I was still very much sheltered, this British sheltered child put in a boarding school in a very remote part of Nigeria, because it was an all-girls boarding school. Our neighbors were the villagers. There was not much of a city life for a couple of hours drive. So it was a real culture shock when I went to school there. But it's what I was expected to do. And boarding school in Nigeria is a norm. So it's not as if it was something out of the norm. It's what people did. They sent their kids to boarding school. It's part of the system they inherited from the colonizers. You have boarding schools and you go to boarding school. So that was not, it wasn't, most of us did. So I didn't get to feel I was singled out or treated differently because majority of my peers went to boarding school there. But yeah, no floating candles. I mean, different types of magic, but not the Harry Potter type.
So you take the Nigerian boarding school experience, you go to England, you're there, and then from there you come to America. So did your experience in already being comfortable, being uncomfortable, give you the courage to make yet another country move?
Not quite. So the boarding school was not my choice. Going to England was sort of an expectation because I was British and it's like the next stage. But once I got into London, that was another shock. It was completely different from what I spent the past number of years living. And no one understood me then. I had, obviously, my accent then was probably more Nigerian. And I didn't understand anyone as far as context goes. So when you're in a new place and, someone might crack a joke and it's not funny to me, but it's funny to everybody else. So there was a whole lot of learning and assimilation that I needed to do when I got back to London as a teenager. And I was living on my own. I was looking for work. I was trying to understand the system that was foreign to me. So I really questioned a lot about myself and my actions. I was very timid. I started to get a bit scared, to be honest with you, about my move. And when I left Nigeria, my mom did say, I remember very clearly, any decision you make at this point, you bear the consequences for. You're an adult now. These are your decisions. So when I got to London, I really didn't want to do chemical engineering, even though I grew up in the sciences. I wanted to do something artistic, but I didn't have the diplomas for that because I was an all science student in Nigeria. So when I got to London, I started exploring going to art school, but I didn't know how to get in. When I visited the schools, they said you need a portfolio, but I didn't have one. I had done some art. My mom had put some of my work in different entries, competitions in Nigeria. So I asked her to send those to me, but it was really a time of not being very sure of myself, as you would expect any 17 or 18-year-old who's on their own for the first time, and having to listen to that voice in my head telling me I couldn't. How would I go to art school when I didn't study art? So there was a lot of that going on. The turning point for me was when I actually did get into art school. And there was a professor there, a teacher, Mr. Charles, and somehow he took me under his wing because I wasn't being as expressive as they wanted me to be, my art, because I was very reserved. I was questioning every move I made. And he really gave me a good, he would talk to me after class, trying to open me up so my art would express enough. And I remember walking home from Hyde Park, through the park, to my studio apartment, and just weeping at just how much growing up I had to do. And then a friend of mine at the time, and this is very important to everything that's happened in my life since then, is he recommended a self-help book to me called Feel the Fear, but Do It Anyway, by Susan Jeffers. And when he first gave the book, because I was agonizing over being indecisive, over being afraid. And he gave the book to me, and I turned it down. I felt it was an insult. I don't need self-help. But shortly after, I opened the book, and it really, at that point, changed my life. I say all this to say I would not have come to America if I didn't go through the work introduced to me through that book. I would not have made that move. So it wasn't the first move to London that did it. It was the growth that I had to do while I was faced with all these challenges and fears that has propelled me on for all the other things that I've done.
There's so many cool things to take away from what you just said. I think one, as a parent, is that I think in America, we want to keep our kids safe and protect them and shelter them and all of these things. And because we do that sometimes until they're in their 20s, then they're not able to have the skills required to face fears and to deal with the hard things and to move forward. So I can only imagine what it must have been like for your mother to say that to you as a 17-year-old young woman. Okay, whatever you do now, as she's putting you on an airplane, whatever you do now, it's on you. That's something that very few, I think, American parents would be okay saying, and very few things I think not many 17-year-old children, young adults, would be okay. So congratulations to you for taking that on and for your mother. And it sounds like the Nigerian culture is just more comfortable with that than what we do here in America. Have you noticed that as you've lived here?
Oh yeah, I have a 19-year-old daughter, so I'm definitely raising her the American way.
You didn't put her on an airplane and tell her to whatever you do?
I did try. I tried to get her to England and then COVID hit, so she's still here. But I did bring this up to my mom not too long ago. I said, gosh, how did you just let me go just like that? And she said, that's what we did. That was the custom. It's a different context. And that was all we had for the conversation. So
it's all she knew.
That's it. That's what we did. It was like, you turned out okay.
You sure did. So you you face your fear, you feel your fear, and you make the choice to come to America. Talk about that.
Oh yeah. So when I came to America, it wasn't a drawn out plan. It all happened within a 3-month period, to be honest, but I was really doing the work of that book. And one of the key takeaways was there are no wrong decisions. They are just different experiences, depending on what decision you make, but there's no such thing as a wrong decision. So I took that to heart. And when the opportunity to come to America came up, so basically I visited that summer 3 times. It was a record company recording an artist from Minnesota, and they invited me 3 times to do music videos and different things. It was all in one summer. And it was just so beautiful here. Just the greens are greens, the lakes, it was just so gorgeous here. And then I thought, the opportunity to stay and go to the U of M came up. So I checked out the U. And I go, I could make a change. I could try and do this. And I packed up my things, and all my friends and family in England, everybody was against it. You haven't made any plans. We don't know where Minnesota is. You can't just get up and leave. But I really had the learnings of this book and all my Post-it note affirmations just going, yeah, feel the fear. It's scary. That's why you have to do it. So I wouldn't have been here if I hadn't gone through that work. So yeah, I came here January 3rd, went to the U January 6th. And I haven't regretted the move at all. I have not.
And it's so impressive, I think. One of the beautiful things about youth is that you don't know any better. So as a, teenager, you made this choice and, I'm following this book and I'm going to do it. And you guys are all wrong. And you came here. And I don't know that at 30 or 40 or 50, people still hold on to that sort of optimistic, I've got this for myself mindset, which is really a valuable mindset because it does allow you to make moves when everyone around you is saying, are you sure?
Yeah, I credit everything to that transformation that happened in my teens from doing the work. Absolutely every decision I've made, I've gone back to those lessons and I've looked at outcomes of previous decisions and realized, well, the outcomes were not too bad. Even if they weren't all positive, not every decision I've made has a positive outcome, but I definitely look at what I learned from that decision. So there's always something to get from it. So it gives me, I don't spend too much time agonizing over what to do. At some point you just accept it. It's either going to go this way or that way. And there'll be experiences either way, and that's it.
And if you learn from it, it isn't a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That was the whole premise. I mean, some lessons are harsher than others, but that's what you signed up for. So here you go.
So once you come to Minnesota, you get an education. Now you've really flipped from a scientist, someone in the sciences, to someone in the arts, and you choose to make your career in the arts. Was that what you thought it would be? Or were you glad to make that switch?
Oh gosh, yes. I fell in love with visual expression when I moved back to London. It's a town full of, it's just so vivid with visual communication everywhere. I came from a place where we didn't have that. Again, I was in a boarding school. So I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I knew I wanted to be involved in the industry. The way to get in was through design. So I just put everything I had into it, just with that strong desire to be able to communicate and express visually that way. I so admired people that could take an idea from their heads and put it down, and the rest of us understood it. I had a cousin back in Nigeria. She drew all the time, and I would just look at her sketchbook with envy, really wanting to do that. But I would tell you, maybe too timid to try. So when I got to London and just said, I really want to do that, and got into art school, that was when I started to explore my own affinity and ability to be creative. I hadn't allowed myself before because I was a science student. So when I enrolled at the U here, I enrolled in the advertising program because I had gone to art school in England, and I decided I wanted to do more of the managerial side of the industry. So I enrolled in the CLA doing the advertising track at the University of Minnesota. But I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I've been in the advertising industry, brand industry ever since.
It's so brave to make such a big switch, because I think we put people in these categories that if your sciences, this is the track you're going to take and you better like it. And how many of us at age 10, 12, 15, 17 know that that's the track we're going to take? And sciences feels like one that once you're down that path, it's pretty hard to make a minor tweak, much less a major tweak. And there's this belief, I think, that either you're arts minded or you're sciences minded, and that those two things can't really live together. But in your brain, obviously they do.
Yeah, I think in the world of advertising and brand development, they have to live together. It's analytical and it's creative all at the same time. So it was like a perfect fit for me. A lot of the work I do today is brand strategy. I'm looking at problems, I'm solving problems, and we're using creativity to help solve those problems. So it's right there, right in the middle of it all. People don't not normally think about that, but one thing I say, even if someone wants to be a doctor, I still recommend you do 1 year in art school. You might be a better doctor. You might find a different way of solving a problem because it's not prescribed to you. You have to create something, create some way of solving it, and that's what we do in art, at least in commercial art that I'm in.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because I love what you're doing now. It's so interesting. And you've created a really interesting kind of niche in how you think about clients and how you think about the world. And you started your own agency. Just walk me through all of that, because it's really spectacular.
Yeah, so started my agency anchored on inclusion. So we build inclusion into the brand development process with the sole intent that the brand outcome will foster an inclusive world. So a lot of that first it was trying to close the gaps that we have right now. I worked in a number of ad agencies and the corporation and realized, and some of this actually, the aha for me was just because I'm an outsider. When I got into the industry and I would see concepts get developed, my first thing is I can tell when it was a stereotype, but people who are entrenched in it couldn't see that. And I always kept pushing back. I go, why is the blonde girl blowing the bubble looking so ditzy all the time? Why, I just had so many questions because they're not images that I was familiar with. I hadn't accepted these because I was new here, but everyone else just felt that's just the way it is. So I pushed back quite a bit. And another shock for me, back when I moved here in the 90s, there were tons of charity billboards for donating to this charity in Africa, or, adopting a child. And that's all people saw here of Africa. And it was images of children with big bellies and just hunger stricken. And I'm not saying there isn't starvation, but it was just so much of it portrayed. That's not the Africa that I knew. That's the only narrative most people had of Africa when I got here. And I realized that the ad industry plays a huge role. Nobody could pay me enough to do one of those ads. Impossible. Because I'll have to push back. What is the residue of us perpetuating these stereotypes on the society overall? When we think about stereotypes, the ad industry plays a huge role in creating them, in perpetuating them. So we have a huge role in undoing the harm that has been done. And if we think inclusively about the work we put out there and how we attract people to our products and services, we can avoid being a damage to society. So that's one of the reasons why the agency exists. And it's to promote companies, products, and services in an inclusive manner. And also the way we do it. So building inclusion from the inside out. I did notice when I worked that there's this haste to create that we don't ask all the questions. So it really comes down to whoever's the most powerful in the agency's ideas that gets produced. Doesn't mean that they were right. So if you're trying to put an idea out and you've got this very powerful star-like art director, if you're on that team and you're not at that power level, you might not be comfortable enough to push back on the idea. And I just didn't want to work in an environment like that, where you could see something and not be safe enough to say, I don't think that's the way to go. So there's that aspect of it. And then also learning more before we produce. There's that saying, I know 80% of my ad dollars is wasted. I just don't know which 80%. There was a lot of just throwing things on the wall and hoping something stuck. And I just knew there's a better way. So we gain a lot of insights. Strategy is a big part of our brand development process. We gain a lot of insights from many different facets. We call it our inclusivity marketing approach. Based on I say, we like to leave no stone unturned. And that's to make sure that what we get produced works for the company and it works for the community as well. So it was to close that gap. That's why we came up with the agency, to do it differently and to show that you can still be a profitable company and be socially responsible while you're doing that. And also an example to other ad agencies. You're responsible for what's out there.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about it that way, because I think having someone from such a different perspective, whether it's another country, another age, another gender, another socioeconomic, whatever it might be, just brings so much richness to the conversation. And that doesn't mean that you've been there the longest or that you have the best degree. It means that you have this different perspective. And as long as you're in an environment where people will respect that and listen, the best products come from it. So the idea that when you came to America, what you saw your home country being, well, I can't say your home country because you have several, but Nigeria, where you have Nigeria and seeing what Africa was portrayed, how much that must have hurt you. It's like I've been, traveling in other countries, and the way they talk about Americans is not positive. And stereotypes can be so hurtful, and the thought that an ad agency has so much power is really important, and to question what we're seeing. So as a consumer, we can look at an ad and accept it, or we can look at an ad and say, that doesn't represent me. my worldview. So I love a lot of what you said. And you were in, inclusivity lately has become a trendy word. Do you like how inclusivity has become kind of mainstream, or do you think that it has been diluted since you started this work?
Well, since I started the work, we chose inclusivity because diversity had already been diluted, equity had already been diluted, and we thought what we really want is inclusion. It's all people to be considered in the creative process all the time. And now there's a whole lot of talk of inclusivity, which I'm happy about, but I'm also concerned that it will become another buzzword if it isn't already on its way to being a buzzword. So I urge people to think more about the actions of inclusion versus the words. So it's basically a show, don't tell. I don't think it's enough to just say it. I want to see the proof points, basically. And that's what we offer, the proof points with our company. We don't just say that an organization is inclusive. We work with our clients. And one of the ways we do that is we added to our roster of services brand culture, because it's what you do, not what you say. So we work on brand strategies and also the implementation of those strategies. But just as important is the culture. How does your organization walk the talk of your brand? And that to me is what inclusion should be experienced through the actions and not the statements of organizations. Right now, there are a lot of statements out there. Hopefully, we'll start to see the action match those statements from a lot of organizations, and just the way people live their daily lives.
Have you seen in the last 5, 10 years, 20 years, have you seen the needle move? And can we look to ads to see how the needle is moving?
Oh, the needle is moving. The needle's moving mainly because of public pressure and organizations' reputations. You can't get away with that as you used to. When I started in this industry, we didn't have Twitter. We didn't have, any social media. But now, if a company does something offensive, it's all over.
And then they need a PR agency.
Yeah,
and they need
exactly.
crisis. Then they're in a crisis immediately.
And they're in a crisis. Our work is to help organizations not get to crisis mode. If you're inclusive, I'm not saying that anybody will be perfect, because no one can truly attain true inclusion, but you probably won't get to crisis mode as some organizations have found themselves. But yeah, no, the needle's moving. I think it's something that a lot of organizations are paying attention to, because it costs a lot of money to fix a reputation. But that's really, I think, because of social media, not because they necessarily felt they had to, is without the pressure, the external pressure.
And consumers are savvy enough to know that they can easily find, while they're standing in a store, they can easily go on social media and make a couple of searches and see what that company actually stands for. Because having an inclusion and diversity officer does not mean a company actually values those things.
Yeah, and I think, just think about even the service industry. When people go to a bank, for example, the experience you have speaks volumes, right? So people they're paying attention to those things. So if a company has a hard time hiring people that reflect the communities that they serve, for whatever reason, or they have a hard time retaining customers within that community, tend to pick up on those things. They might think, they might not articulate it, but it does affect the business somewhere down the road. But yeah, people are savvy, or they're expecting more from organizations that they spend their money with. And even outside of that, everything's so politically charged now. So even if it didn't matter to a lot of people before, now it does matter. they're choosing this whole cancel culture. Like that's where we are now. People are really choosing where they spend their money. You can't avoid it 100%, goodness knows. But I think companies can really set themselves up to avoid being one of those that are canceled. Because it really could just take a 3-day, social media blitz, and there you go.
And don't you think that it's more than just words? I mean, you said a little bit earlier that people can feel it, but it isn't just enough to make a couple of hires, change some branding, and call it good. People can feel that that isn't quite right. And so if someone's motivation to make a change in the inclusion world is for the purpose of getting more business, you can feel that too, I think, because I think some brands are doing that and it just doesn't feel authentic.
Oh yeah, it doesn't pass the smell test, is what I'll say. It just doesn't. As a department store here, I go into, and they have all the posters. You see on their in-store advertising a lot of diversity, but you just don't see it in the people that work there. And maybe I'm tuned into it, so it's a disconnect for me. I'm already looking for those things, maybe. But it should pass the smell test. It really should. And that, when I say inclusion, I really mean all people with disabilities. Let's talk about that. It's not just showing images of people with disabilities in ads, but as a company, how welcoming are they for people with disabilities? And that means looking at the tools you use for business, looking at where you hire people to do work, and looking at the culture of the organization about how to work with people facing different degrees of disabilities. So it's really in the actions.
Can you give me an example of either a client of yours or a brand that we know, or maybe both, that has done this well, where you can look out as a consumer and you can see it, you can feel it,
Well, a lot of our clients in this space tend to be, just right now anyway, a lot of nonprofit agencies, because they're already mission driven. So this is an expectation for them. This is what they want to accomplish. So they're ready to do the work. And then the other pool will be the government sector. They are compliance driven. So they have to do the work, right? What we're trying to push, and where we are making inroads, is in the private sector, where they're the ones with the statements and not yet as much meaningful action around true brand inclusion in their organizations. So I'll speak first on the government sector. So in Minnesota, we rebranded the state of Minnesota's workforce system. It's called Career Force now. We named it that. But that took 4 years, making sure that we included everyone we needed to all across the state of Minnesota. So in our work, what it looked like was traveling the state 3 times, conducting listening sessions, interviews, trying to understand the nuances that emerged as we went from different parts of the country, of the state, I mean, and then trying to build a brand that served everybody, not just some. And so the strategy for that ended up being this unified workforce system for the state, but supported by a portal. So there's a whole portal that was built in there that would focus on needs by region. But again, it was this inclusive endeavor, because what was happening before, it was so fragmented. And there were so many unhappy people that worked within the system. And there were a lot of people that did not know the system existed to help them find jobs. Now, when we think of Minnesota, we are sadly sporting the widest disparity gaps, racial disparity gaps, in employment and training and education, because there was no access to these tools because no one knew about them. So that's an example of how to build inclusion with a measurable outcome on not just who they're reaching externally, but within the organization as well.
It's so interesting bringing a perspective of traveling the state and talking to the different groups of people, because Minnesota, like so many states, especially as you mentioned earlier, we're so divided right now. You can travel 100 miles in a various direction and feel like you're in a different country. People have such different perspectives. And I grew up here. I have lived elsewhere for my work, but I grew up here. And if you ask me, give me some sentences about Duluth, I've got all these things, and give me, tell me about the Iron Range and tell me about Southern Minnesota. And you never having lived here with that experience and coming and saying, okay, I'm going to check all of the things that I've heard, and I'm going to go around and listen, not based on what I think I'm going to hear, but on what I'm actually going to hear, and then work from there. If we all did that, wouldn't the world just be a better place?
Yes, it will. Curiosity is our first tenet of inclusion at the agency. Curiosity is the first thing. So every project we start being intensely curious, and our clients know that. Our strategic phase will take longer than they're used to because we have to be inclusive. And to your point about just how different Minnesota becomes as you travel through it, that's why we went 3 times. Because the first time, especially when we went up to the Iron Range, the reception was harsh. But we're there to take it. Our job is to listen. By our last visit, they brought out the white linen and served us lunch. So you have to, it takes time, but we had to go and listen, and we promised that we were taking their concerns back to the leadership in the metro. And we did, and we proved to them that we did share it. So we did it. There was a lot of recording, a lot of reporting back. So just closing that loop that they had been heard. And these meetings were very emotional sessions. People will cry, people will yell, but you have to hear people out. And at the end of it, they were also happy with the outcome because they felt they were a part of it. That's a stage that a lot of agencies don't do because it's not the most profitable, but for me, it's the most rewarding to take that time to gain those insights and then to craft from those insights and then to have the people. So we had everyone across the state build action plans around how do we make their workforce department better. So they are building back. So it's a totally inclusive process. But as we're doing it, we're also having them think through everyone in their community and everyone that they would like to welcome into their community if they're not there right now. So it's very rewarding, and you have to be ready to hear people out. Even if it's not what you want to hear, you just have to listen. And I think that's what people aren't doing right now. Everybody's talking over each other and making conclusions very early on. And you cannot be inclusive that way, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. It's impossible.
And to understand the different life experiences that bring people to where they are in their life, because that makes such a difference. And the idea that we just need to listen more. And right now, so many people want to be heard, which is why I think people are shouting, because we haven't been listening. So if you're not going to listen, maybe it's like what happens at dinner, when you get a big family together, which we're not doing right now. But back in the day when we had a, big family get together, maybe if I talk louder, people will listen. Maybe if I just amp it up and amp it up and amp it up, and then that's not good. So it's what we're seeing in society, and your work really is a good tool that we can all use as we're thinking about the world right now.
I think so. I mean, it's a 7-step process, 7 tenets of inclusion. And I just don't know how you go wrong if you employ those 7 tenets. But you just have to keep practicing it and doing it and obviously try to get better each time. But I really strongly believe that would help all of us. Curiosity, empathy, realizing that there are nuances that we would never know if we didn't listen, and accepting when those aha moments happen. There's being believable, so making sure it's real and authentic, being respectful, respecting other people's points of view, even if they differ from your own. And then leading up to true transformation, be open to be transformed, be open to be able to make a shift, even if it's a tiny shift. But I think once we employ those tenets of inclusion, it's we shouldn't be at war and the world will be a better place. So that's sort of that's the main pivot from working for others and trying to build an agency to do it this way, because there was no agency that I would have worked in that had the leeway to experiment and explore this way. So we ended up having to build it ourselves. And by so doing, I feel pretty fulfilled. Again, there are no wrong decisions, just a different experience.
It's interesting that the tenants for inclusion are really the tenants for a healthier life and healthier conversations. So I think it's a bummer that it's becoming a trendy word now. And had we been thinking about it 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, we probably wouldn't be at the point where we need to be thinking so hard about it.
Yeah, but the other side of it, I'm glad people are thinking about it.
Absolutely.
I think what happens is people desire peace. I don't think that there's anyone that doesn't desire peace. And people are driven by their fears that they will not have peace, or some people are not in peace, rightfully so, at any given time. But I feel if we think beyond our own immediate need and think about the communities that we're in, and that's a very cultural thing. See, when I lived in Nigeria, it's very communal, right? But America's individualistic. So there is some learning to do. There is some re-socialization that is needed. So yeah, the fact that people are thinking about it now and talking about it is a good thing. I just want people to talk about it and act on it for a long period of time. My concern is that it would become a moment and not a movement. And knowing how we like to be comfortable here, we will soon quickly make it a moment and go, okay, that happened. That was the 2020. We did that. Now we're on to something else. We have to stay uncomfortable for such a long time because growth is painful. And then once we stay in the work, we will start to see the results. So it's good that they're talking about it. I just hope that people put action to it and they seek the action steps. And we all learn from each other.
That was such a great way to kind of bring the conversation full circle, because we started off talking about how in America we don't like getting uncomfortable. We don't like pushing our kids into uncomfortable areas. And here we are back talking about how that mindset can cause discomfort and societal problems and division and unrest and all the things that we are experiencing right now. And to your point, we are in the racial reckoning that has happened in this country and that started really in Minneapolis with George Floyd, that changed the conversation, also was happening at the same time as the pandemic. And my hope is that people don't say, okay, well, we have a vaccine, so that 2020 year is behind us, because the pandemic, let's hope, is behind us. But this racial reckoning and conversations about inclusion, that isn't something there's an end point or a shot or, well, the stores are open, we're good with that now. I mean, that's an ongoing long-term conversation. So to your point, having some of these tenets and changing how we're thinking and who we're talking to and being willing to be changed a little is really important.
Yeah. I think we should all strive for transformation all the time.
You can always get better.
Yeah, I think we can.
So is there a quote or something that has really inspired or motivated you as you've flipped your script several times?
It will be the same one from when I was a teenager. Feel the fear, but do it anyway. That's the one thing I keep coming back to when I want to try something new and I have all those voices in my head telling me I'm inadequate. I just go back to that. Well, I'm just going to do it anyway. And yeah, that's what's served me well so far.
Her company is Neka Creative. We will put a link to your website on the Flip Your Script podcast website. We've had an opportunity as an agency to work with you, and it's impressive what you've done and what you continue to do. And I hope that we have an opportunity to do good work again in the future.
Thank you. I really appreciate this.
So some of the things that Rosemary talked about, well, beyond the fact that her big moment came from a book, because come on, people, we need to be reading. Books have power. Books inspire and can motivate us. And the idea that you need to feel the fear, move through the fear, when so often we want to avoid it and we want our children to avoid it. But feeling fear and moving through the discomfort is when positive change happens. There are no wrong decisions. Just deal with the consequences and the voices in your head. If they're good, listen to them. If they're not, turn them off. And don't we all need a Mr. Charles? Someone to push you, someone to motivate you. And if you don't have a Mr. Charles, be one for someone else. My hope is that Rosemary's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Kristi Piehl and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share our episodes with your family and friends. Do you or someone you know have a story about flipping your script? We'd love to share it. Contact us on our website, flipyourscriptpodcast.com. To stay up to date on all things Flip Your Script, make sure to follow host Kristi Piehl on social media. You can also check out the website for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and other great episodes.